He's deceased already on me.
We're good to go.
All right, so good afternoon. Today is Thursday, October 17th, and we are in the Bisbee Museum, the Restoration Museum. And we are here to hear about your name, Richard Cooksley, and we're also with Mr. Dickinson, the advisor of the Veterans Heritage Project. So, Mr. Cooksley, could you tell us about your military service from the time you were enlisted or drafted, and with any background information that encouraged you to join this service?
Well, I was in the Philippines, and when the war started on the 8th for us, because we were across the international date line, and we were bombed the night of the 8th at our base outside of Manila. And then the Japanese were landing down in southern Luzon, and we went down to oppose that, and we did all right till they started. Now you got to understand that we had all World War I equipment. We didn't have any new stuff. 03 rifles and things like that, and the old flat hat. So then we got down there, and we did all right until they started unloading tanks, and we didn't have any artillery or anything to stop a tank, so we ended up back in Manila on Christmas Day, and the university there cooked us a Christmas dinner, and that was the last complete meal we had for 4 years. So the next morning we went to Bataan on barges, which is across the bay, Manila Bay. And then we had a little activity with the Japanese until April the 9th of 42, when General King surrendered Bataan. And then we started the death march. And I was in the first group. We got in there, and as they straggled in, we were bearing up to 500 a day. They were just emancipated. They hadn't had any food or water or anything. So then I stayed there for about 3 months at Camp O'Donnell, and then I was sent down to WWII, and we did work details out of there, going into the forest and harvesting lumber for the Japs to cook by and so forth. And I was there until 43, early 43, and I was shipped to the worst camp in the Philippines, the camp at Nichols Field. It was a Navy camp, and they were noted for beheading and everything. And that's where I was when, in 1944, October, there's 4,000 islands in the Philippine archipelago, and we had work details out scattered. So they brought all of us in that could still work to Manila. And they brought in 15 old beat up ships, and they put 900 on each ship and started us for Japan. Well, our Navy sank 12 of those ships, the American Navy. And I was on one of the 3 that got through to Hong Kong. And we got bombed in Hong Kong by, I guess it was the 14th Air Force in India. But then I got into Japan, and finally got into Tokyo, And
When,
So-
what time was this around?
that would have been, probably mid-August of 1944.
All right.
And I was transferred from there up to Kosaka, which was a copper mining town, and we were working the copper mine and a smelter for the Japs. And that's where I was when the war ended. And we sat there for a month before anybody ever bothered to check on us. But then they brought in they finally sent a Goonie bird over and dropped a note saying that we were to take over a train and come down to them. They were too busy to come and get us. So we took over a train and came down to the port, and they had a hospital ship there. And we got on that, and had a real old, sort of a knot-headed female running the place, the hospital ship. And we got cleaned up and new clothes. And then she said, well, you haven't had any shots in 4 years. I said, we knew we hadn't had any. So she said, we'll just give you 6 shots. Okay. So first thing she did wrong, and she used alcohol on her arms, you know. And had 3 nurses on each side, and the first nurse broke a needle off of my arm and had to get a pair of pliers to pull the needle out. So then I got my 6 shots and walked over there, and she gave us a shot of bourbon. So I got back in line because she couldn't tell they used alcohol. I got back in line and I got 6 more shots and another shot of bourbon before I got caught. And she said, I don't like you. I said, it's mutual, dear. And she said, you see that destroyer sitting over there? And I said, yeah. She said, that's going to Tokyo tonight. I said, and you be on it. So I went over there, and this Master Chief was the boss. And he said, how long has it been since you've had ice cream? And I said, 4 years. And he says, come to the galley with me. And he gave me a bowl of ice cream. And then he said, I'll be up all night. He said, taking the ship down to Tokyo. And he said, how long has it been since you slept in sheets? And I said, 4 years. And he said, use my bed. I put freshmen's on this morning. So I slept all the way to Tokyo. And we stayed there for some time, and finally we flew out to Okinawa, and from Okinawa we flew to the Philippines, and they kept us there. We couldn't come to the States till we weighed 120 pounds. And finally we left there on one of the fast ships that they used to carry troops in. And we got to San Francisco to trying to think of the hospital that's there. And we had the same problem with them. Walked in, this old gal says, we're going to have an inspection. I said, we don't care, we're going to bed. You can't. I told you you couldn't. Well, you don't tell us a damn thing. We went to bed. And she screamed for the old general come in. He screamed, and we still stayed in bed. And we hadn't been paid in 4 years, you know. So now we were in pajamas and slippers. So I went down to finance, and I said, you owe me 4 years' pay, but I don't need that much right now. But I want a voucher and I want some money. So they brought me a voucher and I got some money. And I went over to PX in my pajamas now, and bought me a uniform and a pair of shoes, and I went back and changed clothes. Started walking out the gate, and the MPs tried to stop me. He said, "You don't have a pass?" And I said, "I don't need one. I know where I'm going." And they didn't stop me, and I stayed away 5 days, and came back. And they said, "Well, we can't do a whole lot for you. We're sending you to Mayo Hospital." And I said, "Okay." Well, we got on a hospital train. Have you seen them? The green ones with the Red Cross on them? There's 32 patients and one nurse on each car. And we lost guys all the way across the country. They'd drop off ever and wouldn't be back in time to catch the train. I don't know what happened to them. But anyway, we got into Mayo Hospital and had a brigadier general there, nice old guy, and he said, can't accept you. Said, "We don't accept anybody after 5 o'clock in the evening." It was 5:30. And said, "Well, we don't care." And we just got all the cabs and went to town and spent the night in the town. Next morning we came out and he said, "Well, get your gear and we'll accept you." I said, "No, it don't work that way. You get our gear and you carry it." And we made them carry our gear. And he says, "I've had enough of you already." And he said, "I'll have you out of here and by it this afternoon. 30-day free leave." Fine. So we had a 30-day free leave, and I went home and spent some time. My brother got home. He'd been in Pearl Harbor when it started. And so we went back, and they had been chastised severely along the way, I guess, because they started acting halfway decent. And, we got pretty well taken care of then, and then they had another hospital down in Miami Beach. They sent us down there, and that's where we finished up with the hospital stuff, dental and all that. And then from there we went to Fort Sheridan for reassignment to active duty. And
So around what time was that you?
well, let's see. That would have been in 45. That was probably March or April of 45.
All right.
And but the Fort Sheridan is where they kept you until they could assign you to whatever post they wanted you to go to. And this captain that I didn't know him, but he'd married a girl that I'd gone to school with, and he asked for me, and I ended up working for him. And I was in the first bunch that went to the jet engine school, and came back and taught the other people how to tear the engine down and tear the plane down and put it back together. And I did that for a while, and then had an opportunity to go to Fort Riley, Kansas, and take a course out there, and I got a commission from Fort Riley as a second job. And I graduated as a cav officer, but when I went to get my ordnance had gotten me. They wanted me, and I don't know how the old ordnance colonel did it, but he outmaneuvered the cav officer, and he got me to go to Aberdeen Proving Ground, and I taught incoming officers there for quite a while, and then I got tired of it. And I said, "Well, how can I get out of this place?" And this old commander just grinned and said, the only way you can do that is go to flight school. And he says, you couldn't pass the physical because you was a prisoner. So I went to Langley Field and passed the physical and went to flight school. I like challenges. And anyway, then I was assigned to Fort Benning. And I was there. We'd just come off of maneuvers, hadn't even unpacked most of the stuff, and the Korean War broke out. And I was OD that day, and the next morning the old man called me in, General Burris, and he said, you got 3 days flight to Korea. He said, you got the only unit like it in the Army, which I did have. I said, okay. And he said, all you're taking now is what you got on your back. No foot lockers, nothing else. We went full field carrying weapons and flew all the way to Korea on Lady Bird Johnson's RD-4s. You know she had RD-4s. You didn't know that?
No.
She bought them all from the Navy. They were Navy planes. Well, that's what we flew in, and what I did, I broke the unit into forts so that if one of us went down, we could still run the unit. And sent them in different ways, and I took the Wake Island way. And we had to stop in Japan to get a ship and loaded it with stuff and took it in. But the wheels hit the water going into Wake, and they hit the water coming out. It's a small place. So anyway, we set up the main depot there at Pusan, and I was the security officer for the base, and the place was called Akasaki, and I became the sheriff of Akasaki. And then Weaver got killed and Ridgway came in, and he called me and said, I cut orders on you yesterday. He says, you take over the supply system for 8th Army. I said, I don't want the job. He said, I cut the orders yesterday. So I got the message. So I ended up running the main depot, and I had a forward depot with each corps. We had 3 corps over there, I Corps, 10th Corps, and 9th Corps. And so I put a field depot with each of them. And then I ran it until I came back to the States. And then came back to the States. I was at Fort MacArthur running 6th Army Supply and Maintenance. And they sent me to Guided Missile School in Huntsville, Alabama then, from there. So then in 55, they sent me to Europe, 7th Army. And I had a little problem with, we had things messing up on the people on the line facing the Russians in those days. And the old man said, I'm going to send you to France, and I want you to go through the depots. They've been lying to us, I know. He said, these colonels said they don't have this stuff, and he said, I'm sure they do. But you go find it. If it's there, we'll get it. And of course, so the USAR commander had sway over anybody in Europe at the time, and he's the one that sent me. So I went to all the depots and I found everything we were missing. And I counted how many they had, where it was, and then called it back in. Well, those colonels all came to the States. And I got all the stuff that 7th Army needed. And then he said, well, you're wanted up in the 51st group. We had 11 battalions in the group. And I took over as the automotive and the artillery specialist for the group, which means I was responsible to see that all the automotive problems were solved and all the artillery were solved. And I did that until I came home. That was another 2.5 years. And came to White Sands Missile Range. And that's where I was when I decided to retire in '60. So I retired in August of '60. I didn't figure that the fourth time might get me over in Vietnam. So I sent 4 boys to Nam.
Your own voice.
They all came back.
Oh, good.
2 of us retired already.
Great.
So that was about it. I've got some letters from everybody I worked for that they were pretty well satisfied.
So I'm just wondering, could you go more in depth into
What?
Could you go more in depth into the Battle of Bataan?
Well, on Bataan, the Japanese landed on northern Bataan and came south. We were on the southern end, and the guns on Corregidor would not help us. They were firing at the sea. They were all seacoast guns. Well, they had a few anti-aircraft, but that wasn't going to bother anything. And you got to know that there was several generals involved. Wainwright was the overall commander. Short was the commander of Mindanao, and King was the commander on Bataan. Okay, when King surrendered, a little bit later, so did Short down in Mindanao, and then that only left Corregidor, where Wainwright was with the Marines and the sailors and the Coast Guard. Now, none of the guys on Corregidor ever made the march. They put them on barges and took them across the bay to Bilibid prison. So anytime you hear one of them say they made the march, they're lying to you, because they didn't. And we've had cases of have to stand them up and straighten them out. Especially the Marines, not so much the Navy.
Can you tell us what the march was like? Give us description of what was happening, and how did you survive it?
Well, I was in the first group. There was a lot of them. Everybody else was behind me, and I started out at Malanga, and as the Japs coming down with tanks, they was running over people with tanks and trucks, chopping heads off and all that. And I saw this guy crippling along, and I knew he wasn't going to make it. And I went up and said, "I'll help you." And he was from my hometown. I didn't even know he was over there. And he had a wound here that caused his foot to drop. And, so anyway, we went the first 4 days without any food or water. If you tried to get water, they would shoot you or behead you or whatever. And we got our first meal up at Malanga, and that was a ball of rice. And then anytime a Filipino tried to give us something, they killed him, chopped his head off. And I don't know that we, after Malanga, we got fed a little bit and got some water, and we got into San Pedro, and we took a train, boxcars, for about 12 or 18 miles, then got off and walked into Camp O'Donnell, which is an old Filipino training camp. And we had one water spigot, and all those people, including the Japs. And then, as the guys were coming in, they were dying, and we were burying up to 500 a day right at the end, right at the start. And what we did, you didn't know it, but we had round dog tags in those days. I don't know whether you knew that or not. Yeah, we had round ones. And we knew that skull was the last thing to go. So we would force one of his dog tags in his mouth and close it. Well, when Gray's registration came in, they found the ID of the man in his skull. And that way they found out who it was, and they could create whatever they needed from that. But the first 2 months of a prisoner, all I did was bury people, dig the graves and bury them. And then they decided that there's too many people in that one camp, so they opened up Cabana One, and I was sent down there doing clearing battlefields and making bridges and things like that. And then I went down to Manila they won at Nichols Field, which was the worst one. What they used to do, no matter what it was, if the guy did something, they made him dig his grave, and then they chopped their heads off, and then they kicked the body in the grave, and we had to watch it. Every one of them, we had to watch that. So then they came out with a numbered system. They knew that we were supposed to try to escape, which is part of our field manual. So he gave us each a number. Mine was Hachijuku 89. Well, if I took off myself, they killed the 5 on either side of my number, 10 people. Well, now, if 10 guys took off, they killed 50 on each side. Well, you couldn't jeopardize your buddies by taking off then. And that kind of stopped the taking off stuff. But the men had to work, the officers didn't. They stayed in camp. But the men had to go out and work on details. And depended on what you were doing. I was working in a rock quarry at the Manila Pit, and we were breaking big chunks of rocks out, putting them on ore cars and sending them down to Nichols Field, and they had a bunch of Filipinos beating the big ones into little ones to make runways. That was the base for the runway, and that was one of the things we did there. And they found all kinds of jobs for us to do, but the last bunch we had, we found one old guy had been shot up pretty bad in China, and they made him a guard there in the last camp I was in. And he was a pretty good old boy. He wasn't a sadist or anything like the rest of them. I don't know whether you knew that they wore their rank on their collar. And they had 3 ranks of private. 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star. Well, any 2-star could kick a 1-star around all he wanted to for any reason, and the 3-star had to field because he had 2 and 1 star. And then they had a HO, a corporal, and then a goon saw was a sergeant, and then the Montagoon saw was a top sergeant. And in combat, the officer was always out in front. He'd have a saber in one hand and a pistol in the other. And then the troops, and then the Montagoon saw was behind. If one of them ran, he shot him. And so they knew they had to go forward. Because going back, that old guy would shoot them. So that's how they went into action. The lieutenant, mostly lieutenant, out in front, and then the old goon saw in the back. Of course, we had to learn Japanese because they didn't speak English to us. It was all Japanese.
How did you keep your mind, what was your mind like when you're burying all these soldiers, you're seeing beheadings, how was your mind? What were you thinking?
You just got numb to it. You didn't pay attention to it. Just wonder if you'd be next. But it eased up some once you got to a permanent camp, like the copper mine I was in. They were a little bit different, the troops there, because they hadn't been in combat. And they hadn't learned all those little things that happened in combat. And except for that one old boy that had been shot up pretty bad in China, and he was in charge of the ones there at the copper mine. And we never had any casualties while we were at the copper mine. Well, we'd had them every place else we'd been. And of course, we lost a lot of them on those ships. I'm not blaming the Navy now.
No.
There was no way they know what was on the ships, but they're the ones that did it. And they finally admitted they did it, but it was because they didn't know what was on the ships.
Sure.
Most of the Navy ended up on Corregidor. There were a few ended up on Bataan, but most of them went to Corregidor from Cavite, which was their headquarters. And the Marines were on Corregidor. And the Air Force was lost all their planes, so everybody became an infantryman. So anybody who'd been in the Air Force became an infantryman. And but we were there was food left on the, hadn't gotten to Bataan, supposed to. Ammunition, things like that were sitting on on the docks there in Manila. Never got to Bataan. So we ran out of ammunition and food in March before the surrender in April. So we were killing horses or anything we could find to eat. Killed a lot of pythons. The big ones.
Mm-hmm.
They were 16, 18 foot long. That was a pretty good meal.
How'd those taste?
Huh?
How did those taste?
It's white meat. It was a lot like a pork chop, where you chop it off at the joints. And,
Do you remember how much you weighed when you came back after the 4 years?
yeah, 80 pounds when we got to Japan, or got to Philippines.
Wow.
And they wouldn't let us come to the States till we weighed 120. They kept us in a hospital there in Manila.
Do you have resentment today with the Japanese?
No, but I won't buy a Japanese product. But I have to tell you, when I was on R&R from Korea, I was in Tokyo and went in this import-export place, and I saw this old Jap run out the back door. And I still speak Japanese, and I talked to one of the girls and said, "What happened to him?" He said, "Well, he recognized you." I said, "What do you mean he recognized me?" He said, "Well, he was in one of your camps. He was a guard, and he remembered seeing you." I said, "Well, go get the old joker." So she did. And we sat down and had ota tea. And he was one of the good ones. He never touched a prisoner or anything. So we sat down and had some tea and talked, and then he wanted to know where my home was, and I gave him the address, and he sent a whole bunch of stuff to Ruth, silks and fans and all that kind of stuff. So he wasn't a real bad old guy, but he's the only one I knew that was halfway decent. And I let him know that I wasn't after him. And he had been severely wounded in China, and that's why they had made him a guard in the prison camps, because he wasn't capable of being on the front lines anymore. So he'd mellowed out pretty good. Yeah. So everybody, every 12 months you got a couple of weeks leave to go to wherever you wanted to go. They had a list of all the places you could go. And I only went once. I went to Tokyo just to see what it was like, since I hadn't been there for a number of years. But off the record, Marshall didn't like MacArthur, and MacArthur tried to pin Wainwright for surrender to Japan, and Marshall straightened him out about it, and Marshall ended up, Skinny ended up as commander at Fort Sam, and I was stationed there too, and we had one of our boys thrown in the pokey down there, and the lieutenant colonel was kind of a sad character, and the MP colonel, and he said, "No, you can't have him. He's violated this and that." So we went into Wainwright's office and told him that one of the boys from Baton was there, and this light colonel gave us a hard time. Well, he called up and he said, "Colonel, you got one of my boys in there?" I said, "Yeah, well, release him." I don't know what the colonel said, but he said, "Would you like to be a private in the morning?" And we went down and got the guy out. The colonel got the message in a hurry.
You were in 20 years?
Yeah, a little over that.
Yeah. And you have some questions, Con?
Yeah, so wait, when did you actually, you were in the Philippines when the Battle of Bataan broke out, but how long were you there before? Were you just enlisted and sent to the Philippines?
Yeah, I was enlisted then. I got there, I can check it, but I think it was June or July of 41.
Okay.
So when did you enlist?
In 1940, July. If you need the exact date, I got it at the house.
And so, and you weren't underage, right? You were.
No, I was
you were-
21.
All right.
I was 21 years old. I'd already had 3 years of college,
Okay.
University of Illinois.
Really? Why did you decide to enlist?
Because all the old World War I people had a meeting, and had us youngsters together, and said, you better get in and learn something about how military operates, because you're going to be in another war shortly. And
Aren't they right?
so about half of the guys that, in my age group, we all went in. And all 4 of us that got caught over there was in that bunch that was told that. And the 2 Marines are dead, and Shep's 94, he's down in Savannah, Georgia. So, out of the 4, well, there's more than 4, but 4 that were in the Philippines, we all came back. And the town waited until we came back and then threw the party for us. Because we all came home at separate times. And then there's a plaque out in front of the Legion with our names on it. So anyway, that was it. Then after the Korean War, I came back to 6th Army and went to missile school, and then in '55 they shipped me to Europe, and that's when the Cold War started. And I went through that. I had a job to fill the gap. You know where that is? That's where everybody came into Europe. It's in Germany, but it's where the tanks and everything came through. And that was the job I had to kind of stop that with artillery. So, and that went on for, well, I guess, 24 months. Had alerts, never knew when an alert was coming. And usually they were 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you'd have to hit your IP, because there'd be some colonel sitting there with a stopwatch to see if you made it or not. And then you had to go to your assigned position and stay there until told you could leave. That went on for 3 years while I was there, 55 to 58. And they roped my wife in. The old man called her in and told her he had to have somebody that could get those women out of Germany and into France. And he said, you're it. He says, I'm not in the service. He said, I didn't say you were. I just said, you're the only one capable of doing it, and you're going to do it. So they trained her, sent her to radio school and everything, and they had a fake one, and she had them all in France under the time that she's supposed to. So they knew she could do it then. And all the time we were there, she was in charge of getting them out. So they had to keep their vehicle loaded with food and clothing and water. And if we went on alert, they went on alert. And if they were told to get out to France, they got out to France. So they could get on ships to come to the States.
So when did you meet your wife? Was it?
After World War II.
All right.
We were married in '46.
She was in the service.
No,
Oh.
she's still griping, making her do those things, and she wasn't in the service. But but she was capable of doing it, and he knew it. And then later on, at White Sands, he was commander at White Sands, and he told me, as soon as I got there, he said, I want you to go to the Pentagon and get 5, he said, I don't like this Quonset hut we got for Officers Club. And he said, get $500,000 and come back and build me an Officers Club. So I flew in, I got the money, and came back and built him an Officers Club. And that's when a lot of air bases were closing. And I went around and got the glassware and all that stuff for nothing. And then he got ready, he said, well, we got to have drapes and rugs. He said, tell Ruth that's her job. So she got the rugs and the drapes and hung them. And then we had a big splash to open it up. And he was happy he had a club that he liked. So that was the first job I did for him. And then I didn't like the job, but he gave me a G1 job. I didn't like that. I had to fly to Pentagon once a month. But you don't argue that an old man knows what he's doing. So, and for years, well, all the time he's alive, my wife got a birthday card every year from him until he died. So he appreciated what she did. So we were pretty fortunate in the commanders we had.
That commander was, what was his name?
Let me think. I got it in the house on a letter he sent me.
We'll get it there.
He was a good old boy. He commanded 51st Group and had 11 battalions in it. And I was the automotive and artillery officer for the group. So if a gun went down in any of the battalions, I'd go down and fix it. Sign the gun book that it's serviceable. Or automotive. Do you remember the 2.5-ton Rios? You don't remember them?
No.
Well, we got them in Europe, and the front wheels would fly off of them. And we had to go to Mainz and figure out what to put on the wheels to stop it. So we finally got it figured out and saved all of them. But every one of them had that problem, the front wheels would come off. And then we had the problem with the 40 millimeters. The breech block stops would break and the breech block would fall out. You couldn't fire the weapon. So we went to Mainz and I sort of figured it was a carbon content in the steel, and it was. And we kept reducing it until finally we got it down to where we could put the new stops in and it worked. So that was the kind of things I was doing.
What did you do after you retired?
Oh, the day I retired, the Boy Scouts hired me, and as a scout exec, and I built camps for them. I built a 700-acre camp in California for them, and then I built the ones in the Chiricahuas there. And then I ran councils for 20 years, and then I said, if I keep this up, some young buck won't have a job, so I quit in 80.
And then when did you move down to Bisbee?
60.
Oh, so you lived here a while.
The day I retired at White Sands, they hired me to come here
Okay.
to build the
And
camps
built
up in Chiricahuas.
Okay.
And then after I got that done, then they sent me to California for a couple of years, and I built the camps over there. And then I just, like I said, Said if I keep working, some young buck won't have a job, so I'll quit.
And you quit in 1980.
80.
Tell us about your family in Illinois, growing up in your family.
Well, my dad was a World War I vet, 1st Infantry Division in France. And he come home and they gave him a job in the post office. And my mother's sister had 2 boys, and her husband was killed in an accident, and she called and said, I can raise one. So Dad said, okay, we'll take Dale, the oldest one, and raised him, put him through school and everything. And he was at Pearl Harbor when it broke. He was a sergeant in the Air Force. And then he was with me in Korea too.
Really?
And then when I went to Europe the last time, he went back to Korea. And then he retired shortly after I did. And then he came to visit me, lived here with me, right next door to me. And then he got sick and he died, and he said, I want to be under the oaks in that old cemetery at Fort Huachuca. And I went out there and we found one grave under the oaks yet. And they got a new cemetery now. So we got him in the old cemetery where he wanted, and put him down there. So then Dad died, and Mom, she came. I took her, and brought her out here with us, and she lived to be 102.
Wow.
So, but she was singing and everything till the day, even the day she died. She just went to sleep. But I got commissioned at Big Red 1, 1st Infantry Division, and that's what Dad had been in. So we both had been in the 1st Infantry Division.
I see.
And that's pretty much. Mom died at 102. And she died right here, because I went home and got her. After Dad died, there wasn't any sense of her putting up with all the crap that goes on, so we brought her out here. She was still singing the day she died.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious, were you ever wounded in any of your service?
I got the Purple Heart, yeah.
What exactly were you wounded for?
Pardon?
What exactly for?
It was just a normal thing. If you don't stand up in combat or anything, but I had some artillery come in and get me, and then after that, a couple of rifle shots, but nothing to kill me. I was too honored for that.
Was that in the Philippines?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, all of my injuries came from there. I didn't have any place else. I'd learned how to. Philippines taught me how to get out of things like that.
So you said you had some medals coming. What's going on with that?
Well, I just got some the other day, including the Bronze Star. I've still got the Cold War medal coming, and a couple of others. And the senator's working on them. We'll see. It only took 60 years to get to first one.
Oh my. So the Bronze Star was for what?
For action on Bataan.
On Bataan, but the whole death march, the whole, just surviving.
Well, no, it was for a little action I had to take. We had a lieutenant ran, left his platoon, and came back to the company and said that his platoon had been wiped out in the firefight, and he didn't have any of his gear, nothing, and was putting himself in for a medal, you know. And the old colonel looked at him kind of funny. He said, Dick, take your unit and you go up and see what happened. So as we followed, here was his gear, thrown it away. His gun, all his equipment was laying there where he'd ran. So we picked it up and we got up there, and they were in a firefight all right, but only had 1 or 2 wounded and nothing serious. So we got them out and brought them back. And he called this lieutenant in and he said, you aren't fit to be up here with the infantry. He said, quartermaster's the sorriest branch we got, so that's where you're going. So he sent him back to quartermaster. And I didn't think anything about it. And I had an ex-FBI agent, was my chief of staff at 6th Army. And she said, there's a captain out here that's from Brown. Brown was a school for soldiers, civilian type. And but said he's afraid to talk to you. I said, well, I don't know him. He said, you must. He knows you. I was a captain then, and I outranked him. But he was this joker that ran. And so I called him in, sat him down, found out what he needed, and looked it up to see if he could have it. So he could, so I issued it to him. But I didn't ever think to see him again. How in the hell he made captain, I don't know.
So what was the highest rank that you reached?
Pardon?
What was the highest rank that you reached?
Your height.
Your highest rank.
Captain.
Captain?
Yeah.
All right. And that was around what time?
Oh, let's see. That would have been in 53.
All right.
Can't think of too much else.
I'd just like to ask, when you, I mean, it's amazing for anyone to survive what you went through. When you look back at your whole life and that particularly the Bataan Death March, how do you look at it now? What do you think?
Well, I volunteered. So you take what you get when you volunteer. They didn't force me to go to the Philippines. I volunteered for it. So I can't cry about getting caught over there. At least that's the way I look at it.
Beautiful.
So,
I don't have any
Okay.
more questions.
I think that does it for us.
okay.
Thank you so much.
And what's this for now? I'm not sure I remembered.
Okay, I'm going to tell you.
Library or something, I mean.